Estuaries where I hope to see him on my way. Defies the laws of physics, gotta feel him, so I pray. Pray for opportunity for youth from where I'm from. They reckon for politics from our heart, that's where I come. Circulating vital fluids for my residents to stand. People's darkness can't evict me from my atrium, my Hey guys, it's Eric Hige here, and I am back with another episode. In this episode, I'm joined by Prince Donald Forghab. Prince studied for a BA in Peace and Development Studies at the Protestant University of Central Africa to leverage his knowledge to contribute to upholding vulnerable communities and those affected by conflicts. He has co-founded movements and organizations such as the Development and Emergency Relief Initiative, where he served as managing director, and the BUA Global Shapers Community, an initiative of the World Economic Forum, where he served as founding curator. Being born in one of the poorest neighborhoods in Cameroon's capital city, his early exposure to poverty and the community commitment of his parents greatly influenced his viewpoint on life. Prince is now studying a Master's of Public Policy at the Blavatnik School of Government in Oxford University. In this video, we discuss the role young people can play in helping to ensure a better future for African politics, including in his home country of Cameroon. The African leaders who inspired Prince's activism, the geopolitical presence of China in Africa and the fear that this may lead to a debt trap, the philosophy of Pan-Africanism and the question of a united Africa, what Prince hopes his political legacy will be, the issue of reparations, and more. Gained a lot from talking to my dear friend Prince in this episode, and I have no doubt that you will do too. Without further ado, Prince.
Hey guys, it's Eric Hige here, and I'm back with another video. And in this video, I'm joined by a very good friend of mine and colleague on the Masters of Public Policy course here at Oxford, Prince. So Prince, I want to just jump right into it because the inspiration for today's video was the fact that Prince comes from Cameroon, Africa. He's done a lot of incredible activism within the country, great work around leadership and development. And I, as you can see from some of my past videos, I'm someone who's proudly Irish indeed, but would associate closely with my Nigerian roots and would describe myself as a Pan-African in the kind of classical sense, Kwame Nkrumah, etc. And Prince too, I think, is very au fait with the philosophy of Pan-Africanism, and I've gained so much from conversations with him. So I wanted to chat to Prince a bit about his work, his intentions in terms of the future of Africa and Africa generally speaking. I think when people talk about Africa sometimes, they talk about it in a condescending and a demeaning way when it comes to geopolitics, or in a very hopeful way in terms of what Africa could be. So we want to have a real world conversation about some issues that we care about when it comes to the continent. So and to Cameroon as well, and to find out a bit more about Prince's work. So my first question in this vein is about what motivated you to come to Oxford to do a public policy master's, and what your background was. So leading up to your arrival to Oxford, what was Prince's story like? Let the people know.
Yeah, I have lots of things in my background which I've often haven't told people. So I went to school very early. Graduated from high school at the age of 15. Went on to study law at the University of Yaoundé too. And then I quickly realized that law wasn't really, my calling. But initially, I wanted to go into law because I thought that was going to be the right way for me, to defend my values, my ideals, and help people who were somehow marginalized within the country. But I quickly found out that I was going to be, very short-sighted at achieving some of those goals. So I went back to do another degree in social science and international relations. Then I majored in peace and development studies. Then did a minor in conflict, peace building, and sustainable development. And at some point I thought that the right thing for me to do is to go into the humanitarian field to help these people who are affected by conflict. That's the Anglophone crisis in Cameroon, the Boko Haram insurgency in the Far North region, or probably the crisis in the East region due to immigration from Central African Republic. But what quickly motivated me to study for the MPP is because when often I go to the field, for this humanitarian assistance, at the end of the day, when you go back home, you are somehow happy that this family is somewhere that's sleeping tonight with a filled stomach because Prince was there and all the rest. But when you drive back from those areas back to where you live, you see a hundred of people living the same precarious situation. And at the end of the day, you say, what have I truly done? The question is, you've not done much, but you've done much for a few. And I think at some point I was tired of doing much just for a few, and I wanted to further the impact. So that's why I decided to come on the NPP, so that I could attack the problems at the larger scale. So my focus is really going into poverty alleviation schemes and they're working with organizations and states that can help, push development at a much larger scale. So that's why I went for the MPP.
Phenomenal story, incredible backstory. You can see why I'm having them on. So, you're a young man and you've already done an incredible amount of work in Cameroon to help the marginalized, as you said. And that seems to have always been your motivation to get involved in politics in Cameroon. Yeah. And in terms of Africa, the country that I'm most familiar with would probably be Nigeria. Yeah. And one thing that I think can be said about the past 10 years or so about Nigerian politics is that youth involvement has had a very big impact in shifting the dial on the conversation. So I think the best example in recent times would probably be the NSARS movement, where a lot of young people were protesting against police brutality and government malfeasance, generally speaking. So my question to you, and then following that, of course, Peter Obi, who ran to be president, his campaign was something that was very powerful, partly because a lot of young people felt they could bandy behind a candidate. Yeah. So my question to you, from your perspective, is what you think youth involvement can bring to politics in Africa, not just Nigeria, not just Cameroon, but in Africa. Do you think it's time that we had more space for youth to shift certain discourses that are taking place, particularly because some people, the classic argument is issues like corruption, bad governance. This is imposed by an older generation that is out of touch with the everyday issues that exist in the country, and maybe hold a traditional mentality that has them think that because they're of a particular generation with certain experiences, they're to be respected rather than interrogated or scrutinized. So do you think youth can change this dynamic for the better in Africa?
Definitely. I think it's important we first of all go into statistics. So according to the World Bank, by 2030, India is going to have the youngest youth population in the world. And by 2050, it's going to be Africa. Right now, 60% of the African continent is between the ages of 12 to 30 years. That's a huge number of people. And we can no longer be living in a system of people who fought for independence. It's true, it's a very great story. They fought for independence, they liberated us. But in today's African society, we need to move forward. Another quick statistic is that Africa per year produces about 3 million degree holders, but roughly 600,000 can actually get into the job market and secure a job. What does that mean for the other 2.4 million who don't have a job? Some are going to go into business. Sometimes some of them fail. In Cameroon, over 3,000 startups fail per year. Those who are not going to have that patience to go into other skills are probably going to be the ones involved in insurgency. And that's why we'll see a rise in violence and conflict in Africa. Because you can have arms, but if you don't have people to fight, the arms are actually useless. So the fact that we have people who are able to fight, with all these countries in Africa means that there's a very big situation. And we need to bring the people involved in such issues on the table of negotiation. I think the future is the youth in Africa. And politics needs to be focused around them and with them. And I'm very happy that there's some new positions have been opened within the African Union, like the African Union Special Envoy on Youth for Peace, etc., which are all great stuff. But it's important that we keep in mind that without the youth of Africa, we actually cannot progress further. And I think it's time that we begin to trust, the younger generation. It's true we have this patriarchal system in Africa where we have to respect our elders, right or wrong, we have to abide by it and all the way. But I think real modernization, we don't need to put completely aside these values, but I think it's time for the older generation to accept that the younger ones are actually prepared to take on leadership positions. Yeah,
very, very good. Before I actually continue with the interview, you mentioned some of the founders of modern Africa, those who built kind of modern Africa, and the founding figures, post-colonialism, and at the precipice of independence. I just want to ask, who are your favorite figures? Do you have any favorite leaders from that era that have inspired you and your journey in terms of political activism and leadership?
Yeah, so I think I identify myself most with Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela, he has one of his names, I'm not very sure the pronunciation, but I think South Africans pronounce it Rolish Lasha, and it means stubborn. And when it comes to my activism, I'm actually very stubborn because I don't know how to paint white something that is black or paint red something that is orange. I like to say the way it is. If you hurt someone feeling, it's not my fault. I'm just stating things just the way I see them. So we had people like Nelson Mandela who really inspired my journey of becoming a leader. And I think the first book I ever read from page 1 to the last page was his book, The Long Walk to Freedom. But equally other people who inspired me so much that they're not necessarily from the African continent. you have people like Marcus Garvey, you have Kwame Nkrumah, you have Malcolm X, you have Martin Luther King Jr. Those are figures that I listen to all the times. And I equally have some motivational speaker. I've forgotten one, but he in one of his motivational videos that pushed me to keep going was that I haven't come this far just to come this far. And every time when I think about that word, and equally a word I heard from a journalist in Cameroon, where she said, before you go at night every day, ask yourself if you are living the entirety of your purpose. I know, and that sinks with me every day, and I always ensure that I stay true to this, to this value and this big Pan-African vision.
Amazing. So a popular argument that has been advanced by some modern Pan-Africanists, particularly some who you might disagree with me here, are on the radical fringe of Pan-Africanism. So like Julius Malema says in South Africa, what he would say is he would equate correlation to the West as being anti-Africa's development. What this implies is that movement away from the West would be for Africa's development. And I'm sympathetic to this to a great extent, because when it comes to colonialism that impacted the continent of Africa, though slavery and colonial ventures have came from different parts of the world, the most recent episode of colonialism and the most devastating was Western imposed. And so these Pan-Africanists who critique the West fundamentally do so very understandably. And I remember Nelson Mandela, he spoke of Mandela. There was a town hall he did in New York in the early 90s, and he was asked a question about the ANC receiving support from Gaddafi and Arafat. And the New Yorkian journalist said, how could you take support from such men? And he said, a big mistake that's made by the West is for them to think their interests and what's good for them has to be our interest and what's good for us, and I found that when I was quite young to be very powerful. So there's an obvious appeal of this message, but do you think it's as simple as distance from the West being good for Africa and proximity to the West being bad, or do you think there might be more nuance in this situation?
I think there are two things we need to take into consideration. The world has become very globalized. And in globalization, you cannot isolate yourself. If not, you are working against your people. That's the first step we need to accept. We cannot completely eradicate, the West or isolate Africa from the West. It's no longer possible in the globalized world. But there's something which we need to understand is that there's still geopolitical tendencies into this world. I think I'm part of, those who believe in the realist theory. Countries don't have friends; they just have interests. That's not me saying that's how small get town. And I think this new generation of Africans are beginning to understand those geopolitical maneuvers. And someone like Julius Malema, he's somehow right with some of the things he says. And I'm not going to tell him radical, so I actually agree with you. I don't think he's radical. What I think is that he's very raw in his stuff, and sometimes may touch people's feelings. But if you look at it concretely, for a country that says she's independent, need to be independent at all levels. Financially, economically, socio-politically, and even have its full sovereignty. Like, how do you explain that in 2024, 60 to 65 years after independence in many African countries, you still find American military bases in them. You still find French military bases in them. It doesn't make sense. And it's not just Julius Malema who is saying it. At the moment of us speaking here, just yesterday, Chad and Senegal equally made a public announcement that they were going to send and kick out all French and American military bases from their country. In 2024, if we say we are independent, we need to be independent at all levels. I don't think America as a country, for example, is going to accept that another country has a military base on its territory. So why do we accept in 2024 that we have an American military base, for example, in a country? And those are the kind of questions that Julius Malema is attacking. So I think it's important that we understand those two stuff. We are rejecting the imperialistic tendencies. We are rejecting foreign influences in the way we manage our affairs, but we are not rejecting foreign countries in our cooperation with one. I think we need to make that clear difference.
Very good. My next question then, and I think it naturally follows from the question of the West, would be China. So a lot of people have been talking about a type of neo-colonialism that might be brought about through China's involvement on the African continent, which tends to come in the form of agreements that on paper look quite good immediately for African countries in terms of developmental projects, but ultimately work in the interest of China because of the exploitative nature of the agreement, which might give China rights over land, rights to define political development in African countries, even through educational curricula, I've read. So how do you see China? Do you think China is like a potential ally? Do you think China is a bloc that Africa has to use wisely? Because obviously the Western world would be least open to developments moving in that direction for Africa. So they see it a particular way too. But how do you think Africa should view China?
China. the Chinese question. It's an interesting one. Because, you know, there are two ways of viewing China, and there are two people viewing China. You have the West view of China on African influence, and you have Africa's view on China. From a Western perspective, China is actually a competitor. And since we are in a world where people want to be strong, in fact, maybe I should explain the concept first. You know, the idea of strong and weak. You can only be strong if I'm weak, and I can only be weak if you're strong. And in a realist world, nations want to be the strongest. So foreign countries, you know, the West view China as a competitor that wants to amass, you know, strength and can somehow become stronger than them. And since there is, you know, that armor race of wanting to be, you know, the leader of the world, they tend to view China as a bad influence on the African continent. The second thing is Africans. Africa has experienced Western influence for over 400 years, from slavery to today, and it actually has never worked to their advantage. And suddenly there's this country that comes and say, we are here to help you in development processes. They're not just saying it, they're somehow doing. They're building the dams, they're building the roads, they're building the health infrastructures, etc. And we are all seeing it. So on an African perspective, the development collaboration is somehow on a win-win. But now there's a third view for people like us who don't just sit and accept what's being presented by the media. The truth is, none of those two are here to save us. None of those two are here to help us in Africa. And we've seen it. In many African countries, we've seen Chinese people, companies taking over substantial quantities of land. You know, be it in Zambia, be it in Cameroon, you know, even in South Africa. We've seen some of these Chinese, maltreating Africans in their own countries. We've seen it in Uganda, we've seen it in Cameroon. And you cannot comprehend why in 2024 people still have the illusion that they have control over another human being and can treat them the way they want. Well, the way I view China and the West in general is that one came with hard power, military might. If you don't do what I'm going to do, I'm going to invade you, I'm going to destroy your democracy. Another came with soft power. They give you the ability to feel like you're on the same level and they grow. But there's one thing that people don't understand about China. There's a debt trap. It's actually a politic in China to put everybody on the debt trap so that everyone actually is in their control. And he has worked with all countries, including the US. So African countries need to be very careful the way they collaborate with whatsoever country, because at the end of the day, they might see themselves putting out all their land or selling their country without even knowing. And I'm very scared for Cameroon too, because our debt today sits at about 12,000 billion francs a year. That's a lot of money. And almost half of it is for China. So we need to be a little bit careful on the way we embrace each country and try to review our diplomacy. But the one thing I would like to make mention before we move to our probably next question is that we cannot blame Chinese or the West for the way they interact with us, because we are in the real world, and the real world countries don't have friends; they have just interests. So it's now left for Africans to re-strategize and review their diplomatic tactics in the way they collaborate with these countries. And I think someone who did it brilliantly was Laurent Gbagbo. You come to my country, I have the resources, I have the space, you have the expertise. You use my resources, you build the industry, the profit that comes out of it is 50-50. It's a good approach. In the first 10 years, we do 50-50. In the next 20 years, it's 60-40. I take 60, you take 40. It's my country. You know, because even when you go out there, that's how they treat me. And we just need to be very strategic in the way we do that. So that's how I see it. That's
very, very, very powerful. I recall, I know Thomas Sankara gave a speech against, I wouldn't say against, but he criticized foreign debt. So that debt trap that you're talking about, and the IMF and the World Bank was mentioned. I think applying your principle all the way through, if it's possible for one to critique the debt trap when it's coming from this direction, you should then follow this principle, also critique the debt trap when it's coming from this direction, and not say the enemy of my enemy is my friend, because the enemy of your enemy might be sympathetic to you indeed, but as you say, because of the nature of realpolitik, it's for their interests. It's not because of friendship. Exactly. So I think it's a very apt analysis from you. The next question is slightly more, you might say, philosophical. So something that we've chatted about previously, and it's the concept of a united Africa. It's not a new concept. People like Kwame Nkrumah have explored it before. Certain interpretations of Pan-Africanism have seen as the outcome, the desired outcome, being a united Africa. I think as time has passed, and as Africa has developed, this to me seems an outcome that is a bit too fanciful. You know, it's something that I would love to read a fictional book about, like what it could look like. You know, because in fiction you have the discretion to paint things more beautifully than the real world can allow. But in light of the fact that in African countries like Cameroon, like Nigeria, that internally are so complex because of the diversity that's there, that is a manufactured inorganic diversity imposed by the drawing of the map at the Berlin Conference. When nations are struggling with their own internal heterogeneity, diversity, I don't see how adding further diversity by saying all of Africa is one will help this. So do you see this as a desired outcome, or do you think something like the African Union can allow Africa to achieve something akin to what the EU has achieved? So a trade bloc. I know there's a lot of trade blocs in Africa, ECOWAS for example, but like a Pan-African trade bloc where you can trade, where there's easy exchange, it's easy to go to one country and work, there's a customs union. So what do you think of this concept of United Africa, and how do you think it should be realized if it's something that is pursued in the end?
You know, I really believe in that dream, and I've been following the African Union and the 2063 agenda. And I was so excited with the idea of having an African passport in 2020. You know, they initially promised us that they were going to work towards an African passport in 2020. And I was looking forward to having an African passport because I want to be able to visit African countries without going through the hurdles of this application process. I think the problem is not Africa or Africans attaining the United States of Africa. I think there are so many geopolitical constraints that are being put in place by foreign nations to stop that dream come true. You know, I know it didn't start from now. The Pan-African vision was carried since the days of independence, and you know already that we had two major blocks in Africa that viewed independence. We had the Casablanca bloc and we had the Monrovia bloc. One bloc wanted all of us to go at once. That's the Casablanca bloc as a united country on a united front. And the quick economic analysis is that if you combine all the economies of Africa today, we're going to be the fifth economy in the world, which is still very small from a continent which is so rich in diversity, you know, and all these mineral resources. That's the first fear of foreign nations, to see that powerful bloc of 54 countries, 30.7 million kilometers square. That's almost 2 times the size of Russia. It's a little bit scary. And another issue is the leadership in Africa. You know, leadership in Africa is almost 0 on 10. And many people are actually afraid of losing their political power, etc. So that's why there's a fear of giving into this Pan-African vision. Because I was asking the same questions. I was president of South Africa. If we become a United States of Africa, what do I become? Do I become governor? Do I become mayor? Or what do I become? Who becomes the president? And I think that was a main issue too when Gaddafi brought up the topic on people were asking who's going to become the president of this whole stuff. Why are we going to get the financing? There's no issue of financing, just an organization. And Gaddafi proved it. They needed $500 million and he proposed to give 400, if I'm correct. And the issue is not that we can't attain it. We can do it. It's just left for each African country to accept and embrace the vision and look at the bigger picture. If you combine our economies, where are we going to be? if we agree on free movement of trade and goods, where are we going to be? It's true the whole economic dynamics behind it's good to question it, because my long-term goal is actually to focus on the African continent and free trade agreement. And when you look at the economic arguments, it makes sense. Most African economies are in this debt trap. They owe foreign nations. Most African economies import goods and services for their population and all the rest. And one of the key questions that came on the discussion of this Pan-African vision was that if we open up our economies today, is it really Africans are going to benefit, or is it foreign nations? Because you, Eric, as an individual, you can be running your business in Nigeria, and with this Pan-African stuff, you now have the ability to export freely in 54 African countries. A Chinese foreign company can approach you and say, you know what, Eric, we usually sell this t-shirt for 500, or for 500 pounds, or for 20 pounds. Since it's you, we're going to sell for 15 pounds, so that you can ship it for free across the African continent for 20 pounds. And you're going to be you welcome the idea, because you see yourself having 5 pounds on each t-shirt. Imagine you sell 30 million t-shirts, how much money you're going to make. So one of those fears that people are probably going to massively import from foreign nations and simply putting behind the t-shirt made in Nigeria, made in Cameroon, made in Chad, and distribute on the African continent. It's a value economy argument. So maybe we just sit and try to strategize on how we can merge our economies, and each country can probably focus on its comparative advantage, because one of the issues we have in Africa is that we have an extravagant economy. We tend to produce what we don't consume, and we consume what we don't produce. So why is Tanzania, Kenya, Cameroon, Nigeria, Ghana, why are all of them producing tea? How many African people drink tea? I don't drink tea, for example, they get their money. So you see that we've actually been transformed to be a raw resource manufacturing continent. Maybe we just need to review some of those few patches, and then we're going to be good to go. So it's actually possible. I believe in it, and I think we just need a new breed of young people to push forward that vision of others.
Very good. So a theme that has run through a lot of what we've chatted about is Africa's potential. As always, when I think Africa is being discussed by people who understand African affairs relatively, we talked about the youth. We talked about the economic power of Africa. We talked about what unification might mean if that's ever achieved in one form or another. So we talked about also issues in Africa, such as leadership, failures in certain countries. So my question to you, accumulating all of this, is what do you think is needed? And I know it's a broad question, but what's at the forefront of your mind when I ask what's needed for Africa to reach its full potential as a continent? Because we can wax lyrical about all the great facets and attributes of Africa, all the things that work to its advantage, but what do you think will open a door to Africa really reaching its full potential? And there's many ways to approach it. There's a why nations fail approach, where institutions are greatly emphasized, the strength of the institutions. There's another kind of critical, you might say, anti-Western approach promoted by people like Rodney Walter, who wrote How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, about how it's a foreign involvement from the West that historically broke potential for Africa and maintains that broken state. But what does Prince think is at the heart of the development of growth for Africa in the way that can allow Africa to reach its full potential?
In all honesty, at this moment in Africa, our major challenge is leadership. Is leadership. But Africa has 7 grand challenges. And I'm not the one saying it. It's this popular educator, Fred Swanika. He says Africa has 7 great challenges. We have education. It's a big problem. After independence, we simply had a copy and paste model from Western countries. And don't forget, the copy and paste model were in the 1960s. And probably was not invented in 1960, but existed maybe in the 800s.
Yeah.
That was just copied and pasted in Africa. Even our constitution, the Napoleonic codes and others, are still what we practice in some of our countries. Meanwhile, these countries have since evolved from those places. We are still left with ancient, approaches to education. One of the biggest challenges in education, we need to review the way we view our continent, because many people are pessimistic about the African continent, the quality of education or whatsoever, but Africa has lots of potential in that regard. The second one is women empowerment. Africa is a very patriarchal society, true, but we cannot put aside, our values and all the rest to simply embrace, foreign values and all the rest. And even the patriarchal society which we're talking about is still to be questioned, because we have the writers like Check and Tajok would study from the time of Egypt, the ancient Egypt, till 1960, actually showed proof that Africa was actually a matriarchal society, where women were given autonomy and the right environment to thrive. And today, with the influence of the West and the Western culture, many women have been put aside where they have lots of potential. Let's not forget that about 49% of those who live in Africa are women. So we need to include them as well. The next is urbanization. In the next 40 to 60 years, 3/4 of Africa is going to live in the cities. But we are not prepared for it. We need to work on that. The next stuff is leadership. Leadership and governance, they go hand in glove. The systems in Africa have been built, you see some foreign people, not foreign people, but you see some of our grandfathers who fought for independence. And those who were part of the independence struggle, today having the impression that the country owes them something. And it's very common in Southern African countries. I'll take the case of South Africa. Nelson Mandela was president. When he left, Thabo Mbeki took over. When Thabo Mbeki left, Jacob Zuma took over. Jacob Zuma left, Cyril Ramaphosa took over. Funny enough, all those people were part of the apartheid struggle. Ramaphosa was Nelson Mandela's lawyer. Thabo Mbeki was his right-hand man. Zuma was one of the people who were fighting the struggle, went to all of them were Robben Island. So why I give the impression that they want to be rewarded for the struggle? It's not only South Africa. You see it in Namibia, you see it in Zimbabwe, you see it in Zambia and others. So I think it's important that we shift from that model. But if I have to say something about the biggest challenge, it's definitely going to be leadership. Because today we cannot afford to put all our struggles or our failures on foreign influence. It doesn't work that way. We equally have our own responsibilities, because if you give me 100,000 today to help somebody in Africa and I decide to pocket it, I can't blame the West for pocketing the money rather than helping people. So we've always had this possibility of having more of ourselves. The World Bank hasn't stopped us from borrowing from them. So when we borrow, despite all the conditions they put around it, there's still that possibility to invest into the right things. But some people decide to pocket it and do it for their personal self. So we cannot fully push that blame on them. So we need to rework on our leadership model. We need to have leaders who are actually ethical, who believe that it's better, in Thomas Sankar's word, to work towards water for many rather than drinking champagne for a few. So I think it's very important that we see that. So for me, leadership and the remodeling of education, we need to work on those two things, because we need to teach African child not to hate himself. We need to teach African child that he's able. We need to teach empathy and love to the African child. We equally need to groom men and women and parents who are going to make the child feel confident in their skill, who are going to to believe in the Pan-African mission. Many people are giving up. Many people leave Africa to study abroad and they never return because of this illusion that we are actually doomed and the continent can never change. But it's not the case. I still firmly believe, right deep within my guts, that there's still this possibility for us to try.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Well, the final question, and the one that I think it's right to end this interview with, is, you have to get involved in politics when you go back home.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that I think is decided for you because of your talent, your ability, and how deeply you think about these challenges, and reading between the lines of them as well. So when you do go back, which I think it's your intention to go back and become politically involved, what do you hope you bring to politics in Cameroon, so that when it's all said and done, people will identify these qualities or these developments with your political personality? What do you hope they say once the rodeo is over in terms of your political career about you and about your contributions to Cameroon?
Yeah, Eric, I lost my father at a very young age, and I grew up with my uncle, and this uncle of mine, he I think I've told you this before, he always saw life as a problem versus solution minded.
Yeah.
And he was always focused on providing solutions to problems. And he brought me up to believe that the secret to living is given. So I've been brought up with this servant leadership belief. And I love putting myself at the service of others. And my goal going to politics in Cameroon is not for personal prestige or whatsoever. It's because I love serving people. And I actually want to serve my country diligently. Because I have this belief. I know one of the major issues in many African countries is that when you're given power, you have the impression that you've been given power so people can serve you. So what I want to bring as a change in the way leadership is viewed in Cameroon is that people need to understand that when you go into public service, you're there to serve. You're not there to make money. You're not there to get yourself some new Mercedes. You're there to make money. You're there to serve the people and to help push the global, the national vision upward and forward. So me as an individual, wanting to go back home, I equally want to go back more apt in my skills. Have the capacity to measure impact, have the capacity to understand people. So I think we need to work on empathy as well. I feel like we are losing those core stuff because it's actually unacceptable that you have so much for yourself and you know that there are millions of people in your country where you are president that cannot afford the bare minimum. We equally need to review on the way we address national problems. And the case of Cameroon is very, very clear because we unfortunately we recognized by foreign nations as well. And after the First World War, put as a mandated territory under France and Britain. And funny enough, two diplomats, Oliphant Picker and Lancelot Oliphant and Georges Picot from France, they sat somewhere and they divided my country into two. And today we still have this problem. And there's a surge in identity problems in Africa, which is a problem. That's something we equally need to address and make people believe once again that there is a national identity and it's possible to have a national identity. We don't need to focus on our ethnic difference. You should be able to identify as Nigerian first before saying you're Igbo, before saying you're Yoruba. I should be able to identify as a Cameroonian first before saying I'm Bamileke, before saying Ambassa. We need to rework and restructure these communal values and beliefs on the African continent because it's going to shape the future of politics. I'm so scared that Africa becomes a roundabout of ethnic conflict or identity conflict. So we need to reshape all of those things, and for that to happen, we need to have a leader who is able to be open to dialogue. And I think I'm lucky enough to be well placed for that because I'm a hybrid citizen. My dad is from the English speaking side of Cameroon and my mom is from the French speaking side of Cameroon. So my goal now is to be able to build on those skills that can permit me to reconcile both areas and move my country forward.
Incredible. It's a fitting point to end, and I said that was the last question, but I'm just so tempted to ask one more. And that was a very noble, incredible answer. It's about what has been on the tongue. Maybe it's a more modern political question to ask about reparations. So I ask you this, presuming that you're going to be a great political leader in the future. I think that's a given from our perspective. I don't just say that as a friend. But I'm asking you this as a journalist might. What do you think of the question of reparations, and do you think it's doomed? There was a lot of hype about it recently because certain countries in the Commonwealth said to the British Prime Minister that they felt reparations was something that the UK owed and had to pay. And certain UK politicians, especially one from the Conservative Party here in the UK, actually said that reparations are owed to the UK for the fact that they ended slavery, rather than them owing reparations for the fact that they led slavery. And I think, Prince, and I think we've chatted about it before, that there's a fundamental misunderstanding and a paradigmatic difference in how African history is perceived. I was raised in Ireland, the Republic of Ireland. By the very fact that a border was drawn on the north side of the country, separating Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland, wars were fought, a civil war was caused in the south, and a period that they called the Troubles occurred in the north, where bombs were dropped and innocent people died, and where a reign of terror in that episode of Irish history killed a lot of innocent people and needed a very serious political resolution that only came about the time of the 90s. So if one border in one small country can wreak such havoc for people, mobilizing Western support in around the period, the British Isles, but also beyond. Bill Clinton was heavily involved in bringing about peace, thankfully, and many great figures from the Irish continent like John Hume. Why then, in the continent of Africa, where borders are drawn all across a continent, not one line, many lines, one in between Cameroon as well, dividing people too. Why then do you think that there isn't that deep feeling of empathy or understanding for the pain caused of the continent to want to mobilize action to try and bring about a remedy to the problem? And even if this conservative politician, Robert Jendrick, didn't believe in reparations as a solution, the act of responding by saying Britain is owed reparations, where do you think this, I'll be honest, arrogance comes from? This unwilling to understand the pain caused in Africa, where do you think that comes from? Do you think it's a modern colonial kind of type of arrogance, or do you think there's a different source to it? And do you think this stands in the way of effective cooperation between Africa and the West, particularly countries that have played a very serious role in creating, in one way or another, some of the modern problems that exist? I know this is a big question to thrust upon you, but after that answer, I saw the political leader in you and I said, well, use your know-how to attack this one head on.
Fair enough. Maybe let me use a philosophical approach to answer your question, since it's equally very large. There's this word when you're studying philosophy, it's political philosophy. They say, ex nihilo nihil fit. That means out of nothing, nothing becomes. And you just need to, from this statement, you can understand why some leaders in the West actually feel like the question of reparation is an abomination. Or they feel like it shouldn't be a topic of discussion. It's simply because out of nothing, since they didn't experience it, or they aren't part of those who are living the aftermath of this, nothing can become of it. They cannot critically reason, the way we see stuff. Because when we take the case of probably slavery, 400 years, of torture, of transfer of human beings, as if they were cargoes from one part of the world to develop another part of the world. You deprive another continent of millions of potential workers that could help develop its continent. And Africa wasn't poor, we know it. Before slavery, wasn't poor. We had large empires, the Kanem Bono, Songhai Empire, the Malian Empire that was thriving. We know Mansa Musa caused an inflation from Mali to the Meg. So it's not a new stuff. So when people feel like nothing should be said about it, it's problematic. That's the first. The second one is colonialism. Why resources were being stolen in Africa for the construction of railway stations abroad, development of new technologies and otherwise, African continent was left behind. And today we find ourselves in a development gap of almost 200 years that separates Africa. Because when the Industrial Revolution started, while the West was developing, our grandparents in Africa were being whipped to actually produce the bananas to export here, to produce the cocoa to export here, to dig the cobalt and all the rest to export here. And it's problematic. And now, since people are unable to do the maths on why something that happened 200 years ago is affecting people today, it's just because they're unable to have the bigger picture. Because if you take the case of colonialism, for example, people think colonialism is finished in Africa. It's not finished. The difference is that it's no longer the whites around with the whips whipping people that are deciding, but now they're deciding from afar with strategic institutions. A great example is the case of French-speaking African countries. In 2024, 14 African nations have their monetary sovereignty controlled by one country. So for 14 African countries, their currency is printed in 2 tiny villages in France. And we say colonialism is finished. It's not finished. That's one example. The second is, you have these beautiful institutions, United Nations, Security Council, you have the Bretton Woods Institution, beautiful names. When they borrow money to these poor nations, the interest is, the conditions accommodated are terrible. And how do you have full control over some of these geo-economic maneuvers when your currency is controlled by one and you're being sucked by another? How do you have sovereignty to to decide on the future of their country. When you have 5 countries, I don't know who chose them, who do they sit at the Security Council and decide based on their feelings on what is good and what is bad. You know, and you say colonialism is finished. It's not finished. That is colonialism. That is global colonialism. That's imperialism. You know, when you have people who today exploit the mineral resources of other countries. No, because I will take a very quick example without calling any country. But the 2 biggest producers of cobalt and coltan in the world is Russia and the Democratic Republic of Congo. And I don't think there's any country that's invaded Russia to steal this cobalt or this coltan. But every day we still see electric cars being produced. We see computers, new phones coming out every day. Where does that mineral resources come from? But every day we're aware that there's equally conflicts happening in Lubumbashi, in Goma, in Congo. You don't need to be a smart person to create a link between those 2 things. To understand that if these people are thriving, it's because one person is suffering. You know, so it's important that we keep in mind that these struggles are still not over. And just for the fact that we're being retarded in a development process, in a construction process, automatically makes the question of reparation very viable. Because if you stop me from growing, they need to make me grow to attain the level I'm supposed to be. And based on the growth of the African continent before imperialism, before colonization, before slavery and slave trade, we're far ahead of European countries. Remember when they were fighting their bloody wars in Europe, they were thriving there. You know, they came and learned from us. And it has been proven from ancient Egypt, from arithmetics to all the sciences. It started on the African continent. So if we look at it very critically, we're probably supposed to be further in terms of development at where the world is compared to the West. So the question of reparation needs to be there. You know, we're not asking for reparation is not monetary transfer because it's just printed paper. And we're not going to go very far with that. We're speaking of transfer of technology. Recognizing that yes, these stuffs were committed, these atrocities were committed, and you know, creating opportunities for other Africans to thrive. And I think there's this American president, I've forgotten his name, but he said it's not just enough to tell people that they have liberty and access to certain privileges. You need to open the gates of those privileges and ensure that they get through it, you know, for them to thrive as well. So for me, I think it's important that we keep this question open and keep speaking about it critically and intellectually. Yeah.
Presidente.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure speaking to you, Prince, and thank you everyone who's listened. I hope you've got as much from this conversation as I have. I get to chat to Prince every day, so that's my privilege. But please, if you have any thoughts, please leave them in the comment section. If there's anything you'd like to see us discuss again in the future, or any topic that was raised today that you'd like to see us maybe dive more deeply into, because I know there's a high level scan of things because there was much to get through, please let me know in the comment section as well. Like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and please expect more content of this nature coming from the channel. So thank you very much and have a good day.
Thank you.